Welcome to Cefn y Parc Cemetery, Llantrisant. So this is, the idea of this is to talk about species-rich, unimproved, fantastic hay meadow grassland. And this is one of the best examples we've got. Cefn y Parc Cemetery is about 100 years old. So about 100 years ago, somebody built a trellis fence around this and enclosed it. And in those days, there's a description of the hay meadows of Glamorgan, particularly sort of the Vale of Glamorgan, coming up into the Border Vale part of RCT. And it said every field, every hay meadow in the Vale of Glamorgan, in this part of RCT, had cowslips and green-winged orchids. Well, that's not the case anymore, but this is something which is almost a timepiece that was kept in aspic and has been managed as a grassland. Not necessarily for the wildflowers, but it's been managed ever since. And it's a fantastic example of what you can have in a species-rich hay meadow. So, some of the classics at this time, in early June, then we've got the birch-foot trefoil, which is one of the great indicator species of wildflower-rich grassland. And you don't have to be in the most wonderful hay meadow you've ever seen to find this. This is something which we get in a lot of our fields. If you see birch-foot trefoil, it's wild pea, growing, then that's a good indicator that the site has got wildflower potential and could be important. It's a really fantastic nectar plant. It's fantastic for bees. This site's got common blue butterfly colonies. There's a moth called the Burnet Companion, which is flying all around. We've got huge. If you came here a couple of weeks' time, you'd see huge numbers of six-spot burnet moths and narrow-bordered five-spot burnet moths, which are these strange little metallic moths which buzz around like they're wound up. And they use this as the food plant. So birch-foot trefoil, and there's just masses of it here, huge amounts of birch-foot trefoil running through. In the foreground here, you've got oxeye daisies, which of course most people will be familiar with, a real, fantastic indicator of these old grassland sites. In here also, and it's not much point pointing it out because it's not flowering yet, but in here we've got black knapweed, Centura nigra. Centura nigra and birch-foot trefoil are the two classic species to look for, the two great indicator species of species-rich grassland. But you've not just got that. This here, which may look a bit like a dandelion, but is actually, Leonston hispidus, rough hawks. Oh, I forget the English names. Rough hawks bit. Anyway, Leonston hispidus. It looks like a dandelion. It's got a nice furry stem. That's another indicator of these old grasslands. There's red clover in here, and in a bit we'll look at where the cowslips are. There's loads of common spotted orchids. We might have actually picked a bit of one in, but there's loads of common spotted orchids in here. So this is an example of what we would call MG5 grassland. MG5 grasslands is the national vegetation classification, but these are the old traditional hay meadows, which we're supposed to have lost 97% of them since the Second World War, and we've probably lost more of them than that. So if you get out, you start looking for these indicator species, you start looking for these sites, you'll be amazed at what you find. There we are. This is a close-up of birch-foot trefoil, Lotus Cuniculatus. Beautiful flower. There's another one called greater birch-foot trefoil, just to confuse everybody, but a nice way to tell the difference. That's not flowering at the moment, but I think those are sepals. It's showing my... Gosh, I should think more about botany, shouldn't I? But the sepals at the top there are coming together, like cow horns. The greater birch-foot trefoil, they go apart, those two green things there under the flower. If you can see that. If that's obvious. It may not be obvious, but if it is, they come together. So that's birch-foot trefoil. Learn birch-foot trefoil. That's my great recommendation. Here we got those of you with a really keen eye. I'll show you the difficult bit first, but those of you with a really keen eye, that's the Leonston hispidus, the rough hawk's bit, whatever it's called. I can't remember its name. But that actually, if you've got really good eyes, and I used to be able to tell this, the hairs on that are forked at the end. That's a challenge for you. But when you actually look at the flower, it's also got a beautiful furry stem as well. So that's another of these great indicators. Then we got, obviously, I'm a trained botanist, I'm allowed to pull up flowers. Red clover. You might think red clover, ordinary old red clover, but in the right combination of other species, That's another, you know, nice indicator showing that these are really old grasslands. And then one of the things that people forget about are the grasses. So actually, there's an awful lot of grasses in here, which any minute might give me hay fever. Won't worry about that. That's sweet vernal grass. Vernal means spring, so that's one of the first grasses of spring that come up. In the background here, we've got red fescue flowering, and in this cemetery, in a minute we can find some. We've got some really nice grasses. There's something called a downy oat grass, a Venula pubescens, and we also get Bryza media, the quaking grass, which has got these beautiful quaking flower heads, which is is the most distinctive grass you could find. Here's a common spotted orchid. There are literally, I'm going to make this up now on the spot, literally hundreds of common spotted orchids in this cemetery. We also have, this is the only place in Rhondda and one of the few places in Meadow and South Glamorgan that still has green-winged orchids, a particularly nice species of old grasslands. Those have flowered and gone now. They flower earlier in the spring. The population of those is we're trying through the hay management to get them to increase. They stubbornly hang on at sort of a few dozen at best, but they are a beautiful flower, and they're long-lived, and this is a really important site for them. This is Operation Love Your Grasses. Okay, you've got to love your grasses, even if they sometimes give you hay fever. So this is a yellow. Downy oat grass, a Venula pubescens. This is a really nice grass. The grass of slightly calcareous conditions. Down here, we're right in the southern end of RCT. We're on the southern edge of the limestone outcrops that come through, and as a result, this part of RCT has some really nice calcareous species, like the cowslips come out naturally. This is where cowslips should occur in RCT. This is where they belong on the limestones of RCT. But here, so this is a Venula pubescens. It's a beautiful thing, beautifully furry on the stem, and a lovely boat-tipped leaf, and a really interesting, well, oaty type of grass, isn't it? It can be confused with other things, and I confuse myself regularly with other things, and I hope I haven't confused myself on that, but it is that. And then the other one, which is a really lovely one, and as I say, I'm allowed to do this. This is quaking grass, Bryza media, beautiful thing. Generally thought of as a kind of a slightly kind of limey kind of species, but I mean you do actually get this growing. I've seen it on colliery spoil tips, growing on where there's a bit of concrete or something or cement in the spoil. Absolutely beautiful grass. Who could say grasses were boring? And they are fundamentally part of it, and part of finding a nice grassland is you're looking for all the positive indicators, and what we have here are loads of positive indicators: the bursary trefoil, the Leontinon hispidus, the black knapweed, the red clover, the oxeye daisies, and in a minute we'll find some cowslips. So those are all positive indicators. These grasses are all positive indicators. The Bryza, the oat grass and the rest of it are all really nice positive indicators. Actually, if you go into a site, some of the negative indicators are things like ryegrass, which is an agricultural type of grass that's sown, and white clover actually can be a bit of a negative indicator. Well, it can be a negative indicator. But actually what we're finding in a lot of fields, although there have been attempts to agriculturally improve them, and they have often been quite agriculturally improved, because they were never ploughed, they were never herbicided. It's amazing how some of these grasslands can recover from the seed bank. And we spend a lot of time saying to people, have a bit of faith in your sites, manage them, look after them, let the seed bank express itself. It's amazing what survives, both in the seed bank, which is basically down there in the soil, because the reason these are ecologically important is these are unimproved soils. These are soils which have got depth to them. They've got all sorts of mycorrhizal fungal arrangements going on, which are beyond me, because that's proper science. They've got, and within that, there are the seeds, could be laid down for many years, of plants that were flowering here. Who knows? I wildly throw numbers out there, but years ago. If you get the management right, it's amazing how those seed banks express themselves. The wildflowers can appear, They can also come in, blown in, and it's so much more rewarding if you actually can achieve that on a site by allowing nature to express itself rather than sowing seed, in my opinion. And the key to doing that on a site like this is management. So this site is a hay meadow, so what it has is that once a year it gets cut. Towards the, well, late summer it gets cut, the cuttings are removed, and by doing that we remove the nutrients. We don't allow this grass to then grow, be cut and fall down and form a mulch, which then suppresses the smaller wildflowers and the choicer grasses underneath. And by doing that we remove the nutrients. Biodiversity loves nutrient poor conditions, and then these wildflower grasslands express themselves. What's amazing here is actually over a number of years now, this has been hay cut for the last 15 years, is how the grass growth has reduced right down. The grass growth here is reduced down and the wildflowers are proliferating. And if you have sites and you're looking to try to have wildflowers, management is key. Removing the cuttings either by doing this or, for instance, by conservation grazing is another way of doing it. But give a site a chance, manage it, give it the options, and you'll be rewarded actually in many cases by what nature will give you back on them. Okay, so this little moth is something called a grass rivulet, and it lives, its caterpillars eat the seeds of hay rattle, which is here, we'll have a picture of. This is actually a moth which, although nationally isn't uncommon, in Glamorgan is really, its distribution is along the sort of south, along the coast, sort of Kenfig, Merthyr Mawr, that sort of way. So this is actually one of the few known sites for grass rivulet, inland sites, and certainly in East Glamorgan. And this site is full of hay rattle. So for a grass rivulet, this is what it wants. So one of the things actually, many years ago, I remember that first alerted people to the importance of this cemetery was the presence of two really kind of iconic species, if you like. Gosh, that's a terrible expression to use, isn't it? But I've used it. So one of them is hay rattle, which is a parasitic species of grasses and I think other things. Beautiful thing. So fundamentally, that's living off the grasses. You know, it's attached in some way to the roots of the grasses growing under here and some of the other plants. It's a beautiful thing, hay rattle. Grass rivulet lives on it. It's a fantastic nectar source, and it actually is one of the species that can actually reduce the energy of grass growth and improve sometimes the wildflower diversity. You don't necessarily want it in every site because, you know, but it is certainly if you had sites which were overly a little bit nutrient rich and perhaps were full of ryegrass and things like that, then actually this is something which can actually take some of the energy out of those ryegrasses and the more robust plants, and then allow space for all these other things to come through and have a chance. And then the other thing, particularly, which I can remember, which is a site here in a bit earlier than now, it's gone over, but that there is a cowslip, and this is a cowslip site. The lovely round, well, not rounds it, whatever, the ovally roundy shape of a cowslip leaf. And cowslips in RCT naturally only occur on the limestone in the south of the borough. They are a very special plant, and actually one of the things that we would try to encourage people to do is not, if you don't live in an area that naturally has cowslips, try not to introduce them, because actually there'll be special wildflowers in that area. And one of the things we do want to try to maintain is the local distinctiveness of the flora of RCT. It's quite amazing in RCT, you can go around it and there are certain plants that occur in certain areas and not in other areas. And those are patterns that have been laid down over thousands of years of the soils and of management and just of the conditions that different plants need. And it's part of the beauty of the whole of Britain is the very local distinctive floras we've got. And that's one of the concerns I have with wildflower seeding, is you can erode that local distinctiveness. So cowslips here, big tick. Perhaps cowslips growing in other parts of RCT where they shouldn't really be. Well, I'm not so sure about that. But anyway, it's one of the really important plants of the site. Well, look at this. That's all right. Yeah, they're devil's burnet companions. Well, that's a nice one, fresh one. I mean, it's an interesting. It just shows. This is a really interesting example of cut and remove, cut and remove, cut and remove, cut and remove. And it is full. This is wildflower rich, and there's no other definition of this. Wildflower rich. The description of this. Anything else? Well, there you go. Just found a tway blade has just been found. So this is actually an orchid. Beautiful little discreet. Often the most beautiful flowers are the ones that don't look showiest when you first look at them. Yeah, I can't describe that, but it's an incredibly sort of weird flower. So it's like an alien of some description. But this is an orchid, actually more associated really with woodlands, a bit of a woodland edge scrub on limestone. But here's tway blade growing out here in the hay meadow. So another of the orchid species that we get here. So a wildflower meadow isn't just the wildflowers, it's the grasses, and it could be things like this. This is a sedge, this is glaucous sedge, Carex flacca, which is a classic species of sort of drier, slightly calcareous I suppose, grasslands, but a beautiful thing. Glaucous because the leaves are, believe me, slightly glaucousy. A similar species called Carex panacea, which is carnation sedge, which grows in slightly damper stuff, but this has got more veins going across the leaf, and the fruits on the flower head are more tightly packed than you get in carnation sedge. But to say, wildflower rich meadows are not just the wildflowers. There's a whole combination here of grasses. This is also a great site for waxcap funguses in the autumn. Again, the soils. The soils, we're learning more that the most important thing in many ways for wildflower rich grasslands are the soils. That's what you can recover. If you may have a site which looks a bit species poor, but if the soils are good, you've got the mycorrhizal arrangements in there, which is a whole new science looking into why certain sites are species rich for all sorts of things. But this is a great waxcap site, so you can come here then after the hay cut's been done, and then in about October you'll come across, it'll be full of bright red and yellow waxcap funguses, all indicators of what's actually down beneath our feet, which is really the reason why this site's so important. Okay, so this is one of this Cefn y Parc Cemetery is a very special site, but it's one of a whole series of wildflower grassland sites that Rhondda I better say that right, Council is managing for biodiversity. And as you drive around, if you drive around the county borough, you may notice the sign there. That's the brimstone butterfly sign that we use to advertise these sites and to show what we're working on. This is a huge hay meadow for what we have, but a lot of the grass verge management we're trying to do is basically small, narrow, linear hay meadow management. It's what we're trying to do. We're trying to leave the areas to flower, cut once, remove the cuttings, just as you would with a hay meadow. We're leaving the cutting a bit later than a farmer would because we're actually using the stuff as fodder, but it's a really good way of promoting biodiversity. And we have a couple of machines now that do that. We have a big machine, a track machine, that does some of the bigger sites, some of our wetter sites that we manage. But now we've got a couple of new, smaller cut and collect machines operating on the road verges, and you may notice those, particularly later in the summer when you're driving around. They cut it, they throw the material into a hopper at the back, and then that does the job perfectly. And this is all part of us trying to put together a network of these fantastically beautiful wildflower rich habitats, and those can be road verges as well. They can be cemeteries, they can be parks, they can be all sorts of places. They're fantastic connecting habitat for insects. We've been walking around the cemetery this morning. It's a bit overcast, it's going to rain later. We've seen 3 or 4 species of bumblebee. There are actually a surprisingly large number of moths flying around here. The common blue butterflies would be flying around if it wasn't so grey. But they're fantastic connectivity habitat for pollinating insects, and actually other insects, because it's not just pollinating insects we're interested in all of them. And they actually end up as being really quite important bird habitat as well. When things like the dandelions and things like that set seed on the sites, then you see the goldfinches coming down and feeding on that. So look out for the brimstone butterflies. We try to put more of them up, and you get the chance, look on the council's website for more information about the grass verge and wildflower management that we're trying to do. Another wildflower, yet another wildflower, and there are many we haven't shown you. But this is pignut, so this is a little umbellifer, so it's relative of the carrot family, I suppose. And again, species of old grasslands. Sometimes you'll see it in woods. It's a sort of plant you can get growing under, or flower growing under quite open woodland canopy. It's called pignut because it has a small and apparently quite tasty nut at the bottom. I'm not suggesting people pick these things and eat them, because umbellifers are famous for either being delicious or deadly poisonous, so I'm not suggesting that. But it's a beautiful thing. It's a species of these old grassland sites, very delicate, and it's just another of the components. If you came here, or you come to any of these sites, and you just look around, then you stumble across these little wildflowers, different species growing in different little pockets and niches in these grassland habitats. The site is all, and just because this just shows, here we've got, you look down the line, you can see there. So what we try to do here is to manage this site. This is a cemetery, so obviously we don't want to upset people, because this is obviously a place of reflection and peace, if you like. But by managing these edges in this way, we've been managing the cemetery in this way with signs up explaining what's going on, with a mown edge and cut edge. It's amazing. In the 15 years we've been managing this site, we haven't, I think, had a single complaint about the wildflower areas as they stand, and I think that's parts of it as well. Is if you are looking to do wildflower management in a slightly public place, it's a good thing to just do a little bit of work in explaining what you're doing, explaining that you are actually leaving the areas for wildflowers for a reason, and it's not just that it's a neglect or you don't care, because it couldn't be further from the truth. We care very deeply about this, and we actually think it adds to the whole experience of being in what is actually a very beautiful cemetery in a very beautiful location. So we're a little bit late for the green-winged orchids, but we've just found 2 of these. These are green-winged orchids that flowered about a month ago. These are the seed heads that will form, which will have thousands and thousands of seed. I mean, orchid seed is like dust. It just flies around. They are beautiful flowers. You can see the way the flowers are set out, unlike a common spotted orchid where the flowers are denser. You've kind of got this slightly stepped arrangement of purplish flowers. We've got 2 colour forms here, a purple one, which is the more common, and a rarer lilac one. And because the common, they're rare here anyway, and they're not big numbers here, the lilac one is particularly rare. And there we've got the base, we've got the leaves, which are basically unspotted leaves, which we want to stay there now, photosynthesize, do all the things they now need to do to build those seeds up, build these plants up so they come up again next year. Classic hay meadow plant. We're hoping that after 15 years of management, we're going to start to see the numbers of this plant build up again. to get back to, you know, hopefully have sort of hundreds of them here one day. But there's probably a reason they're rare. They're stubborn devils. They take their time in proliferating, but we've got the conditions here. We're trying to manage it properly for them, and every year I'm glad when I come and I find that there's still a population here. Okay, so I hope that was interesting. It's June, July, great times of year for going out and looking for wildflower grasslands. And look around your own patches. That's the most rewarding thing. Try to see what you have got in your area. Look at some of the indicator species we've spoken about, and others. You know, if you're in an acid area, then you want to be looking for things like heath bedstraw and tormentil, some of the real classic species, and heath spotted orchids, which are beautiful orchid growing on our acid grassland soils. This is part of the local nature partnership that we're pulling together, which is a partnership of everybody in RCT doing things for biodiversity and trying to secure the future for our natural environment. And we hope you enjoy it and keep tuning in for further instalments.